I hope all of you have the handouts,
Yes.
because if there's anyone who doesn't, I've got the master copy afterwards, and we can make more copies upstairs. I'm not going to read it to you. A handout shouldn't be something that you hand to the group and then read. The handout should be something that they can use on their own later, and that's what you have. The first page, double-sided, gives you the records that are most used in genealogy in England. The second page is one that I put together from several other lists on the important dates for genealogists. And the third one is a little confusing, I know. It is one map superimposed over another. The original map was the old counties, which were used up until 1974. So if you're visiting England now, you will find the red lines showing where the counties are. Some counties enlarged, some became smaller, some got cut in half, some were completely absorbed by another place. A great big Yorkshire that used to have North Riding, South Riding, East Riding, West Riding, and I never know what a riding is supposed to be, is now still in 4 parts, but it's north, south, east, north, south, west, and Humberside. I don't know where that one came from. The final partial page, then, is a list that I compiled from Family Tree Magazine, which always recommends the best sites that they have found during the year. Al?
So, for North Yorkshire,
Yorkshire is up to the north.
it goes all the way, and it includes Durham and North Fab or whatever. Because that's all within one red line, so that's all one county nowadays?
No, York is, I put the lines in that were added. The old lines are still in black.
Okay.
No.
So the old lines are still there?
Yes, the old lines are still there. All right. To begin research, I'm assuming that you're going to be working with the older counties. Unless I figure if you're working later than 1974, you've got it from somebody who was there. But some people claim that they can take their records way back. In English research, anything before 1066 is probably false. You might be able to get to 1066 if you're descended from somebody who was with William the Conqueror. The royal lines are the only ones that go further back, and those usually take you to Charlemagne. Actually, surnames didn't become hereditary until the 13th or 14th centuries. With luck, you can trace back to the 1500s in England, because 1500s is when they started seriously collecting records. But how much you can find on your family depends on several things. Among them, the status of your family, the rarity of the surname, the length of time that the family remained in the same place, and the preservation of the records. If the mice got into your records that you need, tough luck. Water is the other usual cause of damage to records. The higher the status of your family, the more records you're going to find, because more were created. You're more apt to find the land record. They owned land, they paid taxes, they held public office. In my own case, 42 of the surnames on my family entered New England between 1630 and 1660. I'm one of these people who works doubling the number of relatives every generation. So there's a lot of them by the time you get back there. For those who came in 1630 to 1660, I have checked old English records, and some of them I've been able to add or verify a generation that stayed in England. But that's getting close to the end of what you can really expect to find. My next ancestors came from Germany into Pennsylvania. They're often called the Pennsylvania Germans, but Pennsylvania Germans are usually the Amish and Mennonites. Mine were the German Lutherans. That was in the early 1700s. And they gradually migrated across Pennsylvania and intermarried with the English, who came down through New York and New Jersey into Pennsylvania. My Irish came from County Derry in 1800 and in 1830 to Center County and to Jefferson County. The one in Center County may have actually owned land that is now part of Penn State. That's the only claim to fame for that. The last stragglers were an English couple who came from Nottingham in 1842. All of these lines, the four nationalities, met in Pennsylvania in Jefferson County, where all four of my grandparents were born, and I was born. My parents too, of course. The date that your ancestor arrived helped to decide what records you start with. My early research was to simply get all of these families to the border before I even thought about crossing the pond. I found no one else who knew any more about the 1842 immigrants than my grandmother. At this point, I had a hand-drawn pedigree, which I got from her, that said that John Bullers and Adeline Harrington were married in 1842 and came to Pennsylvania that same year with the four surviving sons of John's first marriage. He was actually 20 years older than she was. She was only 2 years older than his oldest son. My grandmother said that they came because trade fell. And this is something I took a little trip off on into history of Nottingham and discovered that, well, I knew John was in the lace industry. And I found that what she described as lace fell, the trade fell rather, might be described now as the business went offshore. The lace industry was developing in Belgium. They had newer methods, starting with newer equipment, and they could cut the price lower than Nottingham could afford. So Belgium was taking the trade away, and John decided it was time to get out, start somewhere new. So, back to John and Adeline. Adeline's father was Henry Harrington, according to this list, and his mother was Mary, his wife was Mary Darker. Mary was supposed to be the second cousin of Queen Elizabeth I on the non-royal side. John Bullers was the son of the Earl of Essex and Lady Essex. When you find these stories, make a record of them, but don't accept them until you can prove them. There's usually a grain of truth in there somewhere. If I have time at the end, I can tell you possibly how Elizabeth got connected to the Queen, but that's one of these weird things. There's actually two possibilities for it. The fact that she was actually the second cousin is mathematically impossible. Elizabeth I died in 1603, and Mary Darker wasn't born until 1801. You don't find second cousins 200 years apart. They might be 2 generations apart at the very most. If you're working with the oldest son of an oldest son and the youngest child of the youngest one, you can get 2 generations away on second cousins, but not 200 years. I had, besides what my grandmother gave me, I had the obituaries of both John and Adeline. So I had birth dates for them. And I knew when they were married, The next step is to access the church records in England. Now, when I was doing this, we are talking about the time before the internet. You will take a different route than I took. You'll be clicking the buttons and finding these things on your screen. I had to go to records. Luckily, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which I'll refer to as LDS, otherwise known as the Mormons, began an immense project of microfilming every record that had genealogical use that they could get access to everywhere in the world. This includes the parish registers and the bishop's transcripts of England, known as the PRs and the BTs. The PRs are the original records that were recorded shortly after the event by the pastor of the church or the clerk of the church. The BTs are handwritten copies of the PRs. The difference can be important. From the list of dates, you can see that the parish records started in 1537, and records of baptisms, marriages, with records of baptisms, marriages, and burials. In 1597, it was decided that there should be another copy of these records, kept by the bishop in each area. All of the PRs would get copied and delivered to the bishop, from the very beginning of collecting them until that date. And thereafter, at the end of each year, the record for that year was to be copied and delivered. Besides filming the BRs and the PTs, LDS created an index including both types of records. This index is the IGI, the International Genealogical Index. It's arranged by county or shire. You can use the words interchangeably. And was available to me on microfiche. You can find them online now. But using the LDS Library catalog online at familysearch.org will give you at least one way to find them. And some of the rest can be found at the bottom of the list that I gave you on the very last page there. I used these records, the microfiche copies, and found Adelaide's parents that were Henry and Mary, as it said. John was the son of Joseph and Mary Ann, not the Earl of Essex or the U.S. of Essex. John had a younger brother named William that I didn't know about, and Adeline had an older brother named William that I had never heard of, and also a younger brother named James, who was unknown to me. What I didn't find was her 3 younger sisters who came to America after their mother died. In that same index, I found the marriages of both Adeline and John's parents. John's mother was Mary Ann Camp. Adeline's was Mary Steele, not darker. I keep going. Henry and Mary Steele can be traced to births in Nottingham. Henry's mother was Martha Darker. My grandmother had confused Henry's mother's last name with his wife's last name. She was a little farther along in age than I am right now. As to the 3 sisters, there was still no sign of them, but they had to exist, because the oldest one married one of John Boulder's sons by his first marriage, and I have interviewed her granddaughter on 2 different occasions. So, for some reason, there's a period of several years where the records weren't filmed. As to the little brother James, that was a mistake between the parish register and the bishop's transcript. The letter B was changed to the letter H. His name was actually Barrington. His parents got confused, Henry and Mary. And he was not Harrington, the son of another Henry and Mary. So it pays to check the index against the original records, because every time something is copied, a mistake can be made. Years later, the missing years for the 3 sisters were found. By this time, I'd retired and was doing my research in Salt Lake. Instead of finding the microfiche in the file, I found a note that said I had to go to the office to get her. The Nottingham Historical Society had found the missing records and had them reproduced on microfiche. Now, in England, the Historical Society handles genealogical information too. They work as they are one thing. Here, we're still competing with this group of historians who think that we're a bunch of nutcases and have nothing to do with genealogists. England does it heavens in that one. LDS was able to buy a copy of the fish that was made by the Historical Society, but they could not get the right to copy the fish. So, to use the fish, I had to sign them out and leave my driver's license. Like any other record in the library, it was free of charge, and I could copy part of it for personal use. So I found Mary Ann, Annie, and Susan. When you think you found everything, check the card catalog again. Card catalog, yeah, the catalog, which is now online. There may be something new that's been added since you searched it the last time. That's how this one happened to come to my attention. I was able then to take the Harrington family back 3 more generations to Nottingham. But Joseph and Mary Ann Bullers were not born in Nottingham. Now, it's time to think about the census. The first English census to list all occupants of house is 1841. That's really considered the first census in England. But the place of birth is just the county or the country of birth. So I took a chance that Joseph and Mary Ann were still alive in 1851. That one shows the place of birth by shire and parish. I found Mary, without the Ann, was born in Nottingham. So why hadn't I found her in parish registers? Joseph was born in Ainsley, Staffordshire. His occupation was ag lab. That is the abbreviation for agricultural laborer. Sure doesn't sound like the Earl of Essex. I was in Salt Lake when I did this, and I could not find any list of parishes in Staffordshire that included Ainsley. So, time to get help. I went to the desk. I explained my problem to the attendant. She was wearing the gold badge. The gold badge is the professional genealogist, the full-time employee. These are the ones with the most knowledge. The white badges are the volunteers. You don't know if they started 20 years ago or 2 weeks ago. She listened to my problem, and off the top of her head, she answered, "Oh, Ainsley is a part of Rolleston. You need to look in the records for Rolleston." So I did. Now, I should be able to say, "Hallelujah, I found them." No. Based on the age, based on Joseph's age in the census, he had to be born about 1778. The records stopped in 1776, with a note saying, "Nothing was recorded after the death of the rector and the appointment of his successor in 1780. Joseph's father was probably the John who had other children baptized before the death of the dad, but I can't prove it. At least I can't. Next step. His death had to be in the Civil Registration Index. This is the next form that you need to learn about. It's a government record, so there's a lot of red tape involved. At the time of the, now, we're in government. We're not doing baptisms, marriages, and burials anymore. The government is going for birth, marriage, and death. So you've moved from baptism to birth and burial to death, which gives you more accurately what you want. But somebody in the family has to make the effort of going to the local register, which is the government employee, who will record it for a fee, and he will in turn send an alphabetical listing every 3 months to the GRO, the General Registration Office. All of these records are combined into one alphabet and filmed. So for each year, there are 4 alphabetical lists, each one for 3 months. Actually, 4 for births, 4 for marriages, and 4 for deaths. These are known as the BMDs, birth, marriage, death. And they're not available, the records themselves are not available to the public. They want money. You can order them by mail or apply for them in person at the GRO. You can find them in Salt Lake City. You can go through the microfilm copies of these records. 3 months by 3 months by 3 months. It's a slow process, but you can find someone that you think fits the description is probably your ancestor. The Lds Library used to collect your money and your form and send it to London to an LDS volunteer who would look up the record and send the copies to you. They don't do it anymore. You have to send it yourself to the GRO. Yes, the GRO. And I'm sure the price has gone up. They were $11 when I was getting them. Now, the record that I found for Joseph, the death certificate, listed his father as John. So I found the right family in Rolston. The death record would list his name, his occupation, his age, date of death, parent, and the register size. I think there's something else in there, but it does give parent's name if the person giving the information knew the person's parent. No mothers, just the father. Actually, there's a researcher in England who put the information on Gem Webb that he found a marriage for John Bullis, who could have been Joseph Bullis' father, without the R in the name. It's Bullis, just instead of Bullers. He married a Mary Smith in Wellington, Staffordshire. Well, luckily I had access to an expert from Nigis who told me that the only Wellington in England is in Derbyshire. So, I'm not accepting this marriage as fact. Wellington, Derbyshire is close to Rolston. It's possible, but there is really no proof that this John and Mary are the same John and Mary that were giving birth, having children in Rolston shortly after that. It's a possibility, but I don't accept it yet. Finding Mary Ann Kant is another winding trail, which shows something else that you can do. I found her in the census, and with Joseph and Mary in the census was a servant named Eliza Weston. Something made me interested in that girl. I don't know why, but I started investigating who she was. She wasn't listed as a relative, but she turned out to be a niece of a Mary Ann Weston who married Thomas Kant. So when Mary Ann married Joseph Bullers, she was the widow of Thomas Kant. I never found a death for Thomas, but I found a marriage for the two of them, and I'm hoping that he died, or she divorced him or something along the way, because obviously she was the first wife of Joseph. Actually, the Mary in the census was his second wife. And that's verified by the fact that I found death records for both Marys. After finding Joseph's, I had walked two of the wives, and I'm sure that my Mary Ann Camp is Mary Ann Weston Camp. Golders. Now, for a different record that I was using, one of my trips to England, I attended a 2-week seminar in Exeter. There were lectures and sightseeing, but some days were reserved for research at the Devon Public Record Office, or for shopping if you wanted to do it. The first day of research, we were escorted down the hill to the closest bus stop. Given the information we needed at the bus, as to bus schedules, the fare, which had to be paid in exact change, and where to get off closest to the record office for downtown. After that, we could go whenever we had free time. The driver told us that he was only allowed to pick up riders at the bus stop. But on the way home, he would drop us off the hill at the entrance to the conference center. His route was going past it anyway. A lot of the records that I would have liked to have used were destroyed by fire during World War II. So what I was using were the copies that they'd been able to correct since then from other sources. The family name that I was searching in Devon is Satterley. I copied the entire court proceeding of the trial where William Satterley's sister sued the estate of their other brother because she didn't get her share of the inheritance. I didn't know until then he had a sister. I had more luck on the day we spent in the Somerset record office. One of our speakers was Robin Bush, the head of the Somerset office. I've heard him at conferences here in the States since then. He's a very entertaining speaker, and he knew everything that was in that office. I told him what I was looking for. I wanted more information on William Satterley. Everything written about him had said he was the Vicar of Ede. That's spelled I-D-E. He was ejected from the ministry when the Commonwealth took over because he was a supporter of Charles I. He lived in poverty until the end of the Commonwealth. He is held up to be the ancestor that everyone should be proud to claim. So I wanted to find out how much was true, and what else could I find? Robin Bush handed me the book Sufferings of the Clergy and said that he had to be in there. Well, I found him. This is what I found. There's my page. Wait a minute. I'm missing a page. Anyway, the page copied from the book Sufferings of the Clergy by John Walter in 1908 had a description that was given by one of his sons, one of William Satterley's sons. The son really didn't know much about what had happened because he was very young at the time, but he knew his father had been a graduate of the College of Pembroke and Oxford, and he was the Vicar of Ede, and he had all of the things that are good about him in there. And he lost the vicarage. He was kicked out of the vicarage because of his allegiance to Charles I. He was in prison for debtor's prison. He lived many years with the only income was 40 shillings per annum, the little cottage that he owned, and he had 9 or 10 children at the time. It was a nice, sad story. It's very well written. I'm sorry I lost the page. I don't know how I could do that. But this book was rewritten some years later by A.G. Matthews. And he included notes that he found in Dr. Walker's copy of the book. And in this copy he found that William Satterley used spirits excessively, and had other functions that were not, the other activities that were not becoming the position of his function. Another note said, the chapter act book said he was dismissed for immorality. So obviously he drank too much and he played around. The moral of that story is, if you don't want to know the dirt about the family, don't start digging. And I'm sorry that I don't have the perfect wording of that those last statements. They are beautifully worded. Now, I'll try to take questions if you have any.
How often were there censuses?
Census every 10 years.
Every 10 years?
Yes. And they were on the 41, 51, 61, the same as Canada does.
Okay.
Gee, since Canada's part of England, I wonder why they do it at the same time. And your list says that the census aren't all available, because you'll notice the two-page double-sided one I gave you has 1966 date at the top.
Yeah.
So it's out of date on the census. The 1891 census is available. You can find it on Family Search, and you can find it on other sources.
Do they have the 90-year law like Canada has for releasing stuff? Because they just released their 1921 census in Canada.
Okay, you're ahead of me on that.
But I don't know where to find it, Chip. I mean, they only have the 1911s you can find easily.
Yeah, obviously they don't hold as long as we do. Which probably is good. For us at least, if we're looking for them. And during my trips to England, I also visited the area of Canterbury, state of Canterbury, Kent and Essex, and I used some time there in looking for that group of ancestors who got to this country in the 1600s. And again, I was picking up little bits and pieces, and then on the internet since then, I found a little bit more on them. I still, because other people have already researched them until they got to the border, and I'm working with what is very old records on them. There isn't a lot more that can be found, but it's always a pleasure to find some little bit. I also have been in Nottingham, and this is kind of where the connection to the Earl of Essex might come in. When I was in Nottingham, I also was in Rutland, and that's a little bitty county in the middle of your map that was swallowed up by Leicestershire since then. But the towns are still there. I was looking for in the town of Exton for the church, because there were Sir James Harrington, the Earl of Exton, not Essex, but Exton, is buried there. And there may be a connection between Exton, that Harrington, and my Harringtons, but there's a big gap of time in between 1500 and 1800. So it's not proven. But that might be where the grain of the story starts. The other possible grain is that Elizabeth I, after Anne, her mother, she was Anne Boleyn's daughter. After Anne Boleyn was beheaded, King Henry VIII remarried. And his third wife didn't want Princess Elizabeth and Princess Mary, who was the first wife, hanging around the court and getting any following that might want to get her out of the way and claim that they were the rightful heirs. So they were, well, someone was selected for each of them for the honor of being the guardian for the children, the honor and the expense. And Elizabeth's guardian was Sir John Harrington, the Earl of Essex. Now that's not a relationship, it's only the name gets in there. But in Exton, I stopped, asked some people on the street for directions to the church. And what I got was, turn around and go back down to Orson Elms and turn left. And when you come to the sheep pasture, pull in and park. You'll see the church. Did he really say Orson Elms?
Horse and hounds.
Horse and hounds. The pub was sitting there in the corner. And, yes, the church was in the sheep pasture. The sheep were there. The entrance to the sheep pasture was a sheep gate. And if you've been in the West, you know what a cattle gate looks like. A sheep gate simply has the bars a little closer together because the sheep's feet are thinner, or smaller. They're trying to keep them from falling through, but yet enough that they are afraid to cross it. So you drive across the sheep gate and the church was open. You could walk in, see the tombs of the Harringtons of Exton, which I took pictures of. So some of my trips were not really finding anything of important, but just of interest. And I've been in England 8 different times, actually, but part of them were educational conferences. And those I didn't have time to do genealogy on, but at least 3 times it was purely for genealogy.
Have you ever heard of any way that in England where there might be a list or something of the men that were out to sea all the time? Like my grandfather and my great-grandfathers were always out to sea.
Okay, there
and
are
we
maritime,
found census, and they're not even mentioned in the census because they're not in the homes.
there are maritime records that I've never got around to, never needed to use. On the list there, I think it's towards the bottom of the first page, the front side. That I have. Okay, wait a minute. Merchant seaman is what I'm thinking of. 29.
Say we own the home.
1837 to present. Now, where you're going to find that one is if somebody tries online and see if you can locate them. It might be something you have to find in English.
How far back?
Yes.
I just
Go
have
ahead.
a question about, like, if you were starting from scratch, and the first thing you might want to do if you have some basis for the marriage records, how, if they're not online, where would you write, or how would you go about getting those?
Try the family search.org.
Okay,
Uh,
go there first.
That is the LDS source.
And that would point you.
And their catalog will have whether they have. So, and they're putting as many of their records as they can right now on the online, which I don't know what they're thinking, but they are going to have everything online, and this could be the end of the hospitality business in Salt Lake City. People don't have to go to Salt Lake for the records. I don't think they realize this yet. They're still depending on the church conferences to bring people in, but they're going to lose the genealogists who come there. But it's their choice. If you can't find anything in their index, their catalog, I really don't know what the next step is. But you might try one of these sources. Maybe just Google it. See if anything comes up.
How did you go about connecting, when you're tracing them to their arrival here, then how do you find the county or shire in England? Census reports say born in England.
The ones that we gave her in the 1600s, some of them people have already researched. The other ones, there are some I'm not sure, because nobody else could find where they came from. For the one in 1842, my grandmother had the information. She knew Nottingham. Now, I didn't know if she was saying Nottingham City or Nottingham Shire, but I started with the city just to, well, I knew he was in the lace industry, and it sounded to me like I wanted the city. But,
You find some strange things sometimes. I was looking up Wells Cathedral in England, just for the heck of it.
I've been there.
And it goes way, way, way back. But there was one, well, it isn't really funny, but I had to laugh. There was a marriage, and it was a second marriage for both of them, and I can't remember what they said about him. But whatever he did, they burned her at the stake. Well, that was in 14-something. And a sad marriage it was, they said. A sad marriage it was.
I'm looking for ships from the 1600s.
you'll have to be louder.
Ships from the 1600s from England to America.
I can't hear you.
The ships, different ship names for the 1600s. Where would I look? Just Google that again and just say ships coming over from, say, Devonshire into America. Where do I go to the letter LDS for the different ship names?
Other people may have a better answer to that question than I do. I'm not. I've never looked for the ship that my ancestors came from. One of my Irish ones, the story of them gets passed along with what the ship was and what they carried with them on the ship. My 1830 from Ireland, nobody seems to know how they got here. Actually, one cousin says that one of them was a stowaway on the ship. The other one was a passenger, and every other day they switched places. They were twin brothers. Of course, that story falls flat when you find out one of them came in 1830 and the other one came in 1835. But no, I don't know anyone who has found what ship they came on. Their naturalization records is what guaranteed that they came from Derry.
There's very few maritime, passenger lists before 1820,
Right.
1830.
As long as England considered that we were still part of England, they didn't need passenger lists. You were just going from one place to another. The same as you can't find them coming to Canada sometimes for that same reason. They're not even going out of the country.
I have researched olivetreegenealogy.com, and I found all the ships lists for my ancestors from England and Ireland, and where they went, when they left, where they went to, how long it took them to get there, and pictures of the boats.
What was it? Well,
olivetreegenealogy.com.
I said you'll hear more about it than I do.
The other thing is, you don't want to get too excited about it, because I looked for 2 days once down in Washington years ago to find out what ship one of my great-grandparents came over on. And I found out they came from Liverpool, okay, and they were like 26. That was it. Didn't tell you anything else. In Liverpool, you found out the reason they were from Liverpool was the ships then didn't sail from any particular spot. They would go up and down the coast, picking up passengers until they got enough to fill the boat, and then they would go over across and come back again. Well, where they picked the people up had no bearing on where they were from. So this Liverpool looks like a nice place, but so what? You know, it didn't have any bearing on what was going on. So searching for ships, in my opinion, was very disappointing.
And some people would have traveled from somewhere in the middle of the country to whatever port they were going to
Exactly,
sail from.
exactly.
So getting the port that they left from.
Usually they got robbed, so they had to stop and work for a while. Oh yeah, it was a zoo back then. When I-
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have been through some of the records, found somebody who was transported to Australia. It was a relative of John Buller's first wife. And I've read the bastardy records for Radford Nottingham. And yes, I found one. But this is one of the things, when you get into things like the quarter sessions, number 5 here, this is the business of running the community. And that's where you pick up all of these little stray bits and pieces. It's slow reading, sometimes hard to understand it, but when you find your family name in it, you may find something very unusual that you want to know, or something that you just assume not have found out.
Well, the other thing too is electronics to the rescue, because there's one of those biographies that they used to print years ago that my great-grandfather's in, and I found it online in a PDF file. But just on a lark, I searched for the Kings and some other people that were known to be there, and sure enough, they found all of the ones that were in the index, including another one that wasn't. So I thought it was pretty cool, with just one of my cousins that got married or something. It wasn't all that exciting, but it was kind of cool that I found it when, it wasn't in the original index. So.
Yeah, indexes aren't always exact. There can be mistakes in them. And they can be totally missing many times. Paul?
A few years ago, when I tracked my father's people back to Cornwall, I don't know how I did it, but I stumbled on an organization that was starting up named Genes R Us. It costs about $15 a year to belong to it. And if you put your information into it, then anybody that belongs to it has the access to it. And over the course of a couple of years, I found about 6 distant cousins, most of them that were still living in Cornwall, and they helped, excuse me, tie some of the loose ends together because they were looking for ancestors and they were there, so it was easier for them to find stuff. So that can be a help, and for $15 a year, it's pretty cheap. They try to get you to to pay for census and whatever, but essentially it's, what the hell was it, hot something was a hot tips or something was, when you click on that, then you see anybody that clicked on yours, and they will put up who they have for that family name, and you can compare it to see if they really jibe, and if they do, and then you can pick up what they've done, and they want what you've done, so it's helpful.
What was the name of the site? What was the name of the site?
Genes R Us.
.com or?
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions, anybody can think of some more? Go ahead and ask them later. I do believe in refreshments.